In this video, we're going to go over 3 methods of budgeting your money when you get paid every other week, but you have to pay your bills every month. The first method we're going to talk about is the paycheck-to-paycheck method. It's the most intuitive method as it most closely resembles what you would be doing if you didn't have a budget anyway. However, it's also the method with the most moving parts. The second method we'll talk about is the dollar cost averaging method. This method has less moving parts, but it's a little more abstract and it requires some startup capital. And the third and final method we'll be discussing is the pay yourself method. This is the simplest of all the methods. However, it does require a significant amount of money in your account in advance. I'm going to be creating this entire budget, including the calendar, using Apple's Numbers app, which is their free spreadsheet app. However, you don't need to use Numbers. You can use the calendar on your phone, the calendar on your wall. You can draw one in chalk on the sidewalk, whatever works for you. Now that we've got our calendar, let's go ahead and fill it in. Let's say that this month you get paid on the 1st in the amount of $2,000. Then let's go ahead and say your first bill of the month is due the very next day. We'll say it's $200. Your second bill, it's due the next week. Let's say $50. And let's put a third bill in that same week for $100. There are 2 types of biweekly paycheck cycles. The first type is the type that I'm on, where you get paid on the same day of the week every other week. And the other kind is where you get paid on the same 2 days every month. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to say that we get paid on the same 2 days every month, and that our first paycheck is on the 1st and our second paycheck is on the 16th. So for this month, we have exactly 15 days in our first budgeting period and exactly 15 days in our second budgeting period. And this is really the kind of pay cycle to which the paycheck-to-paycheck budgeting method is best suited anyway. Now that we've filled in our calendar, we can get to budgeting. What we're going to need is a table, and we're going to need a categories column. Our first category will, of course, be bills. Second category will be food. And the categories after that are really going to depend on your lifestyle, your priorities, your expenses. For the purposes of this demonstration, let's say the next category is commute. Maybe you drive to work every day, you pay a certain amount in gas on a regular basis. You could even throw your morning Starbucks into this category. Next, let's say savings, and then investments. And let's go ahead and create a sinking funds category. Finally, let's create a catch-all category called miscellaneous. Now, your real budget would probably look very different from this. These are just for demonstration purposes only. Now that we've got our budget categories, we need to fund those categories. And to do that, we're going to need another column. This column will show the amount we plan on spending in each category during the first 2-week budget period of our monthly budget. The first category we're going to fund is bills, and we're going to do this by just looking at our calendar and adding up the bills in period 1. If you're on a biweekly pay cycle, unless you make significantly more than you spend, you're really going to need to factor in period 2 when funding period 1, and I'll explain why in a moment. But for now, let's go ahead and create a period 2 column, and let's add our period 2 bills to that column. We're also going to need a row that shows the total amount of money budgeted per period. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and pretty things up a little. Now, there's an obvious disparity between the amount we're putting towards bills in period 1 and the amount we put towards bills in period 2. That disparity is a big part of what makes budgeting on a biweekly pay cycle such a pain, and why there are so many moving parts to the paycheck-to-paycheck method. So let's go ahead and add a moving part. Let's add another column. This column will be for your monthly budget. We're also going to add 2 more rows. We're going to add a row called remainder and a row for income. Obviously, the income row is how much income you took in during that period. And then the remainder row is just income minus total budgeted. Now that we've added these additional pieces, we're going to go to our monthly budget column, and we're going to fund all of our remaining categories until our remainder is either 0 or just above 0. So now we need to fund all these remaining categories, and we can see that our remainder in period 1 is much larger than the remainder for period 2. So how to fund these equitably? Well, let's think about it. Do we want to put more money towards food in period 1 than period 2? You could do that, especially if you like cooking. You could buy a lot of groceries in period 1, eat out of your freezer during period 2. But to keep things simple, let's say you want to fund food evenly across periods. We'll take this and divide it by 2, and then we'll do the same thing for this column. And there you go. You funded food across both periods. Next, we'll do the same thing for commute, and just assume that the costs are the same in both biweekly periods. And let's do the same thing for miscellaneous. After all, there's no reason to think that your miscellaneous expenses will be any different in the second 2-week period than in the first 2-week period. So you can think of these categories that you're funding evenly across periods as fixed costs, because they cost you the same amount in each period. These others are variable, or you call them discretionary. You can fund them however you choose, and it's not going to have a huge impact on your life. Your landlord's not going to kick you out or anything. So to figure out how to fund these variable cost categories, we need to create 2 more columns. and we're going to label these columns percent, and I will explain why momentarily. What we're going to do with these percent columns is we're going to look at each monthly line item, and we're going to figure out what percent of that comes from period 1 versus period 2. For instance, for bills, we have $1,600 monthly, and around 22% of that is coming from period 1, and around 78% is coming from period 2. So now that we've got these percentage columns filled out, what we're really interested in are these two cells. You can see that we're funding 22% here and 78% in this other column. So in figuring out how to fund these variable costs, what we're going to do is create an inverse relationship between these and this. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to say this equals this times this. So because we're funding 78% of our bills in period 2, we're going to fund 78% of our variable costs in period 1. So let's do that again. And again. Then we're going to do the same thing here, except we're going to multiply by 22% instead of 78%. Now, we went a little over, so let's take some money out of investments to try to balance our budget. And still a little bit over, so let's take some money out of sinking funds. And that did the trick. So now everything is fully funded. We've even got a little bit of money left over, which we're going to call our budget cushion. And throughout the month, as needs arise, we can take this extra money and we can put it in whatever category needs those extra funds. And there you have it, your biweekly budget using the paycheck-to-paycheck method.